200 people registered for this morning, but at 9 o'clock and noon. So we know that Dr. Dalton, this is a very popular topic, and also your reputation has preceded you. I am Debbie Rosen. I am the founder and owner of the Study Pro. We are an executive function and study skills center. So we, like I think everyone on here, of course, I'm a parent and have 2 kids in school, one in college and one in 6th grade. We are all in the front lines of this together. And we're thrilled to have Dr. Dalton back. He's been here for a number of live events, which of course we all wish we were having right now. Just to get things started and kick it off, I wanted to make sure that everyone knows, it looks like pretty much everybody's found the Q&A. As you can see, there's some emojis to keep us happy. So if you want to share with emojis, then we'd be thrilled for that. The first 30 minutes or so, it's going to be Dr. Dalton sharing some of his wisdom. And then the last 15 minutes, we're going to open it up for Q&A. So with that, I wanted to share a little bit about the Study Pro. We are an executive function and study skills center. We have found that during this time, it is more important than ever to help kids feel that they have the structure, that they are, of course, in control. And we'll talk a lot more about that today. Helping them feel that they have an understanding of what it is that their expectations are, that they're going to have the time that that they would like to put front and central for their own free time and their me time, to make sure there are people that they're feeling connected to, that they feel care and are seeing them and feeling that they're seen and heard. So much has changed for them almost miraculously overnight, not miraculously, but almost overnight. And so that is certainly something that we've been doing for a long time and doing even more now with our coaching for kids that are both in schools with grades that count and with grades that don't count. They present their own challenges. And we really want to help both parents and students feel that they have a sense of routine, a sense of control, not a sense of overwhelm. And of course, we're going to be talking a lot more about that today. So thank you. I thought we'd start with a little bit of humor, at least in my house. My daughter has an entire row of little hand sanitizers. That is her 2020 flexing. Last year it was nothing but AirPods, and I was the last one in the family to get them. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of a smile for the day, because we do really need to add laughter into our everyday routine. It's so important. And with that, I think, again, many of you know Dr. Dalton. We, as I said, have had the pleasure of having him here. He's known for being the founder and owner of the Center for Anxiety and Behavioral Change in Rockville. They also, I should have noted on the slide, I'm sorry, I actually used this from your previous presentation, but they now have an office in McLean. And I know I spent a lot of time talking to people about the excellence and your therapist there too. And so we're very glad that you're here in McLean, as well as over on the other side of the bridge. So with that, what we're going to do is start by talking a little bit about just anxiety, right? We know that probably 100% of all of us have some level of anxiety we didn't have a month ago. And, maybe you can help by starting talking a little bit, Dr. Dalton, about what exactly is anxiety. And we know that there's a ton to be anxious about now. We know anxiety is appropriate and normal reaction to stress, and even a very healthy tool for all of us. If you see something scary coming, you want to run away, and that's what we're supposed to do. But tell us about, when it gets to be an issue. And I know that there is some good news about anxiety that you shared in the past. So maybe you can start with that.
Sure. Yeah, let me just begin by saying thank you so much for the opportunity, Debbie, to reach out. I see some names over on the right side that I know, so it's great to see some people again. So anxiety is something that evolution really wants us to have. It's like pain. It's designed to keep us safe. It's designed to alert us to the perception of danger, and it's supposed to be paired with problem solving so that we can take steps to avoid things that are dangerous. And so you're right that anxiety is a positive force in our lives. We would not want to be devoid of anxiety, because then we'd be doing unsafe things. I think a lot of us have had the experience of seeing people gathering despite the orders to social distance, and are wishing they had a little bit more anxiety, and that they were more understanding of what's going on right now. So the first thing is to understand that anxiety is future oriented. It's about what may happen. Anxiety disorder, I think of almost an allergic reaction to uncertainty, where it's something where people can't tolerate not knowing for sure. We really talk about uncertainty as being the foundation of all anxiety. And then what happens after that is it begins to impair functioning. That's when it becomes disordered, is when it's no longer serving the function of alerting us to appropriate levels of danger and cueing us to take steps to avoid it. A disorder begins to interfere with functioning. It stops people from doing things they'd otherwise want to do. It stops them from being able to enjoy their life. They have a lot of intrusive thoughts. They're having a hard time focusing and concentrating on the work they're doing, whether they're a student or a parent or somewhere in between. So that's what we're looking at here. Oh, I'm hearing that someone can't hear us. Is that okay? I think it's just one person. So I just want to make sure everybody could hear me. So anxiety really is something that, if it's kept in an appropriate level, can be very, very functional for us. We know, for instance, that people tend to perform the highest under moderate levels of stress. We don't tend to do our best if we're not very invested in what it is that we're doing, and stress means that we're oriented towards something that's important. But when the stress level begins to exceed that sweet spot, so to speak, it begins to really, really interfere. And I'm hearing this from a lot of people right now, is that they do feel overwhelmed. I know parents are doing 3 jobs at once right now, and I have 3 kids at home myself right now, so I can also relate to this, where we're asked to be parents, teachers, and employees all at the same time. And it's important to know that the only thing that any one of us can do is one thing at a time. So there's a lot of things here about anxiety that are appropriate right now, unfortunately, because there's actual danger in the environment. But there's also a lot of things that we can do to keep the anxiety in that sweet spot so that it empowers us and doesn't remove our ability to function in the way that we want to.
Mhm. And I know that you've said in the past that the good news about anxiety is that it is something that can be treated. It's treatable. And so, can you talk a little bit about that? And then we'll lead into a little bit about how can we model calm in the absence of being able to be treated by a professional like yourself. How can we, as parents, really be modeling calm for our children?
Great question. So anxiety disorders are the tagline that a lot of us use is that they're real, they're serious, and they're treatable, thank goodness. And so what's really interesting is that the patients that my center are working with, we work a lot with kids and teens who have significant anxiety disorders, is that many of them are actually doing quite well right now because they've been trained over sometimes a long time to tolerate uncertainty, to be able to differentiate in your head thoughts from evidence, being able to radically accept what you're experiencing, to talk to yourself like your own best friend. They have these skill sets. And so many of them are feeling like right now, welcome to my world. That this is something that the way people are feeling right now is the way that people with anxiety disorders feel every single day. I've for years have been asking my kids I work with, what do you think people should know about you that they don't, that you have an anxiety disorder? And almost to a person, they say how exhausting it is to be me.
Mhm.
And that's something that we could say intellectually. But now that we're all in the same boat, I think so many people are talking about how exhausted they are every day,
Mhm.
even though they're doing less things. And I think it
Mhm.
really does help us to relate more to what somebody who has an anxiety disorder is feeling every single day
Mhm.
until they're appropriately treated. So these are very treatable. And I always tell people that having an anxiety disorder and being treated effectively for it in many ways is better than never having had one, because you're learning how to overrule fear as a decision
Mhm.
making tool. You're able to persist
Mhm.
in the presence of distress. You're able to pursue your values in the face of obstacles, internal and
Mhm.
external. And so I think that's something that people who have learned those skills are actually doing quite well right now, for the most
Mhm.
part. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that, but the rest of us are kind of brand new to this level of persistent intrusive thoughts and anxiety, anxious arousal, fatigue, all of these things. But these are also treatable.
Mhm.
There can be skills that parents, educators, students, anyone can learn, and they can model those obviously for the younger kids as well.
Yeah. I love the fact that you use the word skills. I mean, we do often when we're talking to teachers, doing some professional development around executive function, we say if students are not doing something, they're not turning their work in, they're not adequately providing enough time that they need to get their paper written, if they're not doing as well on the test, even though they study, they're really just missing skills. And so that kind of turns us or moves us to this next question, which is that, you know, what should we say to our kids, and what are the skills really that we should be modeling for them? So maybe talk a little bit about each one of those, and also if we have younger kids, obviously it's different than we have older kids who may be hearing things more on their own.
And we could have different ages in our own family too, that they're hearing mixed messages that way. I think that there's two things for the first question about what do we say to our kids. I think equally important is how do we listen to our kids, because we may assume that the kids are experiencing the fears and anxieties about the same things that we are, but we're going to be mistaken. So I think the first thing is to listen to the kids. I think that adults right now, we're often worried about the illness and the economy and what if someone we love gets sick and what are we going to be doing, where kids are often worried about my assignment and I don't know where the email is, the link for the Zoom class today. And so really listening to the kids and seeing where their anxiety is living within them, I think is really, really important. But also it's really important, especially for the different age ranges, to make sure that we keep the kid worries separate from the adult worries. The message for kids is that you will be kept safe and taken care of. And that's the adult worry, is to make sure that's happening, and it is, and we're keeping you safe, as safe as we know how to keep you. I think that's a really important message for kids to get. It's also really important that kids learn that it's okay to be uncertain right now. It's okay because certainty is always a mirage. We never actually have certainty. We sometimes have the illusion of certainty, and that illusion has been stripped away right now. And so we want to be able to educate the kids that this is something that we don't know when school is going to get back in, hopefully in the fall. We don't know if you're going to have summer camp this summer. We don't know, many things right now, but we do know that this will end. We just don't know when. We can talk about how history of humanity is replete with plagues and pandemics, and that the one thing they all have in common is that they're temporary and that we will get through it. So I think that level of reassurance is appropriate. But I think a lot of the kids, especially the ones that I work with, tend to be somewhat perfectionistic sometimes. And so now they're faced with a novel situation of trying to learn remotely from teachers who are learning how to teach remotely. And so I think
right.
I mean, it's and parents who are learning how to balance all of these things at the same time and learning that they can't. And so I think that part of what we want to educate the kids about is that, sometimes you swim toward shore and sometimes you tread water, and that both are appropriate sometimes. And that right now, do the best that you can. I'm a firm believer that kids are as successful as they know how to be. And that does orient me to, okay, well, what skills are they lacking? How can we teach them things? How to talk to themselves in an appropriate way, but also how to be self-compassionate, how to understand that this is a really, really hard time right now. It's hard for everyone because it's so new. There's no playbook to follow. We're trying to fix this plane in mid-flight. And so what we're going to be doing here is really trying to frame the pitch like in baseball, where good enough right now, guess what? It's good enough right now. And I'm hoping
it's great.
Yeah, right. And what we're aiming for here. I think that's what we want to be saying to the kids. But what we say is less important than what we do, honestly. And so the second part of your question, Debbie, is about how do we model coping skills? Well, the first thing is to keep in mind, I want you to think of cope as an active verb, like exercise. It's not something that we do passively. It's something that we have to put great effort into doing. And so one of the greatest gifts that we can give our kids during this period of stress and turmoil is to model for them effective resilience skills. What is it that we can use as a foundation or a reservoir of resiliency during this time? And so one of the important things to do here is to show them how to take care of themselves by taking care of yourself. to make sure that you're keeping your routine, that you're not sleeping to the crack of noon. Like I know a lot of people, their sleeping schedules are thrown off a lot right now. So getting up at a reasonable time, exercising every day, making sure that we're not consuming unhealthy things, whether it's junk food, alcohol, or too much news or social media. I think those are really important things to really try and get through this by talking about resilience, showing people how you are resilient, and that is way more important than what you say to a kid in this circumstance. So other things that you can do to model for the kids, there's a lot of research that shows that any kind of altruistic acts actually boost our ability to cope during a period of stress and turmoil. So having kids write letters to people in nursing homes or call people, making sure that we are volunteering ourselves, whether it's sewing a mask or doing whatever it is that our skill set allows us to do. Having the kids draw pictures saying thank you to the delivery people to put it on our front door, giving them some agency over the circumstances they're in to feel like they're contributing in some way also is a way to boost their resilience. And so I think all of those things are really important.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Rogers used to talk about always looking for the helpers when you find a situation. And I think there's so many great websites that have just good news on them and are really celebrating our heroes that are on the front line. So that's another great example. So one of the things you kind of wrote, go on, so on.
Because Fred Rogers also said something really important, that in our homes we want to make feelings both mentionable and manageable, and they can't be manageable unless they're mentionable. And so being able to have emotions be part of the dialogue in a family discussion is a really important thing for parents to model as well. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it prompted my
No. You're the star of the show anytime. But it reminds me a lot as we move on to our next question that in a lot of other areas that are important, whether you're thinking about something like meditation, mindfulness, yoga, all kinds of things like that, it's super important as a strategy, as a central tenet, that you have this dialectic, right? You may be doing a pose in yoga, or you may be thinking in meditation, but at the same time, it's very painful, and you're learning to live with that emotion and at the same time be calm. And I think that's really a skill, going back to your word of skill, that's very, very important now. And it's one of the things that I've heard you talk about is this idea of kind of being anxious, and that we can have these feelings, we can have these feelings about that are anxious or angry or whatever to your point, naming that feeling, and at the same time. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the more research that comes out in psychology, the more that we're seeing that so much of our emotional suffering comes from what we call experiential avoidance, or EA, which is designed to not feel a certain emotion, that we find shortcuts out of emotions, whether if it's an adult, it's caffeine or drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be, distraction. For kids, it might be video games or other kinds of activities. And the more that we try not to have a feeling, the more we're turning away from our own experience. And I think that we all know intuitively that we can't turn away from ourselves and fully accept ourselves, because our experience is part of who we are. And so rather than trying to say things like, no fear, I'm not going to, have that, that's really dismissing of the emotion. Steve Hayes talks about this a lot. He's one of the psychologists that I respect the most in the country. And I think it's really important that we're able to find a middle path, that we can allow ourselves to hold the emotion that we are experiencing present without being overwhelmed by it, that we can sit with it, we can see the wisdom embedded in the emotion, and that we can allow it to be there. We don't want to look at a cloud and think it's misshapen, or see a tree and think it should be a bush. We want to be able to really accept what we're experiencing in this moment, which means that we can allow the emotion to be fully present and pursue our values and do things that are important to us in our life. Really the foundation of maintaining anxiety is avoidance. And I specialize in kids who avoid school And by the way, I'm very worried about that when kids try and re-enter school whenever that happens. But they're not avoiding school, they're avoiding their emotions they experience when they're at school. And so being able to have the kids, in this case, sit with the experience and outlast it, to allow it to be present. I work with a lot of these kids. Now, one of the questions I'll ask them is, finish the sentence for me. I can be anxious and, right? And so I asked this for a teenage girl who had missed a lot of school, and she has a lot of other medical concerns, like a lot of the kids I work with do. And she thought about it for a second, and she said, one of my favorite answers, she said, I can be anxious and strong. I run a group of anxious teens, and I asked the group to finish the sentence for me a few weeks ago. I can be anxious and there's a guy who's been through a lot of treatment in his life, and he looked at me and he said, I can be anxious in any damn thing I want to be.
I love that.
The idea is that we can allow it to be there. We want to think of the emotion as a passenger in the vehicle that goes along with us towards our destination, but does not get access to the wheel and doesn't choose the direction we're traveling in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, and I think, we hear a lot from speakers that come to the Study Pro. You've been here and you've said this, that, we so often want to fix these problems when we see them in our kids. Of course, naturally, we don't want them to feel anxious. We don't want them to feel scared. We want to protect them. And I think that's, going back to the original or one of the original questions about what can you do to model calm? What can we do? We can say those things out loud, right? Boy, I'm really nervous about this, and I'm still going to push through. And I think that's something that's so important, and it kind of leads us to this, one of the central tenets you talk a lot about too, which is another skill, the skill of flexibility, and how flexibility is really such a central tenet as a skill to address anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I ask parents to do all the time is to cope out loud. So it's not talking about your financial concerns and things that don't belong in a kid's, consciousness. But like you were saying, Debbie, that, wow, I had this thought, I was, doing this thing, and then it occurred to me that I can do hard things, or just because it's hard doesn't mean I can't do it. That bravery requires the presence of fear and anxiety, or it doesn't count. And so, talking to them about how to persist in the presence of fear, and how that you're doing that in your life sometimes can be really helpful. But when it comes to flexibility, I think that I've been talking about this for years, but I think that never has it been more important than it is right now. I go back to Darwin, where he said that evolution doesn't favor the strongest or even the most intelligent. It favors the most adaptable. And I think that ability to adapt quickly requires, obviously, a great deal of flexibility. We're not looking at perfectionism, we're looking at optimalism. What's the best for a given situation? Because it's going to shift and change over time. So what is optimal for a kid to be doing academically right now is way different than it was a month and a half ago. That right now we're looking for a balance, as we often do, because we can't have younger kids sitting and staring at Zoom lectures for 6 hours nonstop. Especially, I work a lot of them, I know you do, Debbie, with kids who have executive functioning challenges, who have impulse control disorders, and they're on a computer, which is where they game and play most of the time. And now they're being asked to do this, and that's just not something a lot of these kids can succeed at in the way they could in the classroom environment without the scaffolding that was there in the classroom environment. So I think it's really important to have parents be flexible that as well, so they can model, that we are shifting our expectations for you. You can shift the way that you're perceiving your own role right now as a student, and realizing that there is no right answer to most of life's most important questions. It's a trick question because there's many right answers to it. I'm also a firm believer that so much of our fear comes from, so much of our distress and suffering comes from that space between what is and what we think should be. And as I say very frequently, that if there is a forecast for snow and it doesn't snow, it's not the weather that's broken, it was the forecast that was not working very well. And the same is true. None of us expected our spring to look like this, right? I mean, there's just none of us, I don't think, a year ago would have said, I expect next April to be not leaving my home and wearing masks when I go to Safeway, and worrying about all the things that we're worrying about right now. But flexibility means that we don't judge the present moment. We don't argue with reality. We use as a foundation for us to move through. And we know that growth and comfort are often incompatible experiences. And so, yes, we're suffering. We're struggling right now in some significant ways. I'm also a firm believer in that dialectic that struggle is pregnant with meaning and purpose. And the research shows that people that find purpose in the middle of trauma or turmoil tend to do quite well as a way to cope with it. If you look back even to, Frankl, a man's search for meaning back, in the concentration camps, he found the same thing with his logotherapy, almost a century ago, that it was the ability to find meaning within suffering that was a great source for people to be able to rely on, to make it through, to be resilient in the face of all of this struggle. And I think that obviously requires great flexibility. You have the palm trees up there because I often talk about palm tree thinking, that we want people to deal with these tough times in the same way that a palm tree can deal with the wind, that it doesn't fight against it because it doesn't need to. Okay, that we can allow it to be there and we can simply outlast it because of the flexibility that we can use. So the flexibility in a palm tree and within us is its strength. That's why palm trees do quite well during really bad storms, is because they don't fight against what they're experiencing. They simply go with it and they outlast it. And I think that same skill set is so important to be using right now.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I think that a lot of parents out there hopefully will be able to use that with your kids and name that word. Oh, I love how flexible that is. Wow, look how flexible that is of you, because I do think that if we can all be more flexible right now, that's going to really help. And, we're all kind of looking for a way to not judge ourselves. We see all the great, ideas and things that are out there. There's tons of ideas that are coming to us about, how to be more creative, how to get outside more, how to build amazing things with your kids. And I think sometimes we're all feeling at the same time like we're just trying to get through. So I've heard you talk about your model of the 3 C's. You want to talk a little bit about what those 3 C's are? And I like so much the simplicity of it. And I think it's what many parents really need now, just to kind of frame what their lives can look like.
Yeah, I came up with the 3 C's because we want to make the knowledge we're giving kids sticky so they can use it, and for parents the same way. And so the 3 C's, I think, are always important, but again, more so right now. The first C is going to be continuity, that so much has changed, as we all know, in our routine. So the more we can keep the same. So continuity between what used to be and what is now, but also continuity from day to day. And so that means structure. It means scheduling our kids' days as much as we can, because that makes days predictable. The more that kids can predict the way days are going to go, the more they're going to be able to cope effectively with that experience. So daily sleep and wake cycles, meals at the same time, having a routine in the evening, whether it's board game or family movie night. Last night, my entire family watched Groundhog's Day because it seemed appropriate somehow.
Yeah.
And so I think that having those routines in place is going to really help kids. So set times to do work. I want kids outside doing something physical every single day, riding a bike, shooting hoops in the driveway, going for a walk, whatever it might be. So having that continuity of daily routine is going to be really, really important. The second C is always critical, and that's connectedness. The research is very clear that social support is the vitamin C against depression and anxiety. And this virus is cruel for so many reasons, but part of its cruelty lies in the fact that it's producing great obstacles to the sources of resilience that are so important to us. We can't gather in the way that we usually do, whether it's kids just playing outside, or it's adults getting together, or even in some cases grieving together. And so being able to find sources of connectedness is so important. And so many of the kids that we work tend to isolate as a means of coping. And it's really important that we try and encourage them and schedule them to do things. That's one benefit I think that kids have above us is they're digital natives. So they're already online before this happened. And so it's an easier transition over to what they're experiencing right now. Like my daughter turned 10 last weekend, and we had a Zoom party for her. And for an hour and a half, they were hanging out and squealing and laughing and sharing with the share your screen on Zoom and playing with the video backgrounds and talking. And it was real connectedness and real fun. So the more that we can facilitate connectedness, that's going to be really important. The third C is about creativity, which is tied to the flexibility, right? We're going to need to be really creative in ways that we do our jobs, in ways that we parent, in ways that kids do their work, in the ways that kids talk to their friends. I do think that so much of the things that we struggle with end up being engines for creativity. I talk a lot about how frustration is the birthplace of creativity. And so because there's so much frustration, that means it's going to produce so much creativity. And I think that's a really, really important thing. The other thing is that the other part of creativity is expressive arts. I think that we as a species always have an instinct to express ourselves when we're going through hard times. So I'm encouraging everybody to do what it is that you love to do artistically, whether it's playing music, writing poetry, doing a short story, photography, you name it, quilting, something where you can express your emotions and process them through any kind of an expressive art. That creative outlet, the research has shown for a long time, is also a source of resilience. So creativity in our approaches to solve problems, but also creativity in this fact that we can create beautiful things in the presence of the pain and struggle that we're going through. And that, again, will imbue meaning to our experience. And some of the great things society has ever produced have come out during really, really challenging times. When Shakespeare was with the Black Plague, he went out and wrote a play, that we now have all of these centuries later. So I think that there's so much in terms of what we can do to be creative right now.
Yeah, and of course, one of the things that we love the most at the Study Pro is this concept of growth mindset. And if we as parents can sit down with our kids and take up that new creative pursuit, whether we decided for the first time that we're going to try to sew some masks and we've just never done that before, then we can show that, you know what, it's not just about what we're born with or how smart we are. We really can learn how to do anything. And it's such a powerful thing to model for our kids. And the one last question, which really I think is important for everyone to hear you talk about specifically, is this idea of, the fact that we often have this kind of runaway thought train, right? That we think in our world at the Study Pro, we hear about, we're not going to do as well on the test, and then we're not going to do well in the class, and we're not going to get into this school. And that's obviously not as important in everyone's mind right now, but they shouldn't be speaking to me this way, and therefore they don't respect me. And we just get this runaway thought train, and there's all kinds of overwhelming emotions that come. And so there's this kind of a two-part question, right? There's this concept that, of course, you have of overvalued ideation that you've talked about, and how we can separate thoughts from true evidence and help our anxiety. But also, maybe you can talk about what are some things that parents can do in the moment when kids are spiraling out of control, because we know they're more anxious now than they have been in the past.
Yeah, so both questions are great. So first thing is to understand that behavior sometimes that we observe is actually an expression of emotions that the kids don't have the ability to articulate. So keeping in mind that we expect kids to have some more behavioral disturbances during time, and they might not even understand the behavior, where it's coming from, but really being able to contextualize for them what's going on, to be able to label emotion. So, wow, it seems like you're really frustrated right now. So reflecting back the emotions that we're observing so that we can help the kids to have the language of emotionality so they can better understand what they're going through. There's science that tells us that even being able to label an emotion accurately reduces its intensity. Okay. But going back to your other question about overvalued ideation. It's a fancy word. All it means is that we think our thoughts are more important than they are. But that concept is so central to understanding anxiety because our brains are so powerful, our frontal lobes are so effective, at least for most of us, that we can think through a lot of different scary scenarios. And our brain has a hard time differentiating the scary thought from the reality. We train kids to keep in mind that feelings are not facts and thoughts are not evidence. That if I go back to work on a Tuesday after a long weekend, it's going to feel like a Monday all day. That doesn't mean it is. It just feels like one, right? The other day it was really cold. It felt like it was beginning of March, but it's not. It's April. And so keeping in mind that thoughts are just things that occur to us. Thoughts happen. We don't want to believe everything that we think. The first thought we have is like that kid in the classroom who raises his hand like this early on before the teacher even asks the full question. And I always ask the kid I work with, does that kid have the right answer usually? They say, no. Okay, so raising your hand first does not mean you have the right answer. And having a first thought does not mean it's more accurate. It simply means it's first in line. And so being able to separate yourself from your own thoughts, to realize that we are not the internal dialogue, we are the observer of the internal dialogue, that we can have thoughts and we can choose how we respond to them. Think of those thoughts as a salesperson knocking on your front door. It doesn't mean you have to buy what they're selling just because they knocked. The same thing is true for our thoughts. So one of the skills, the simple skill, but it's a powerful one, and this is true for adults as well as it is for kids, is when you're having scary thoughts, is just to label them like that. Right now, I'm having a scary thought about my job, or about what if someone gets sick, or what if there's no school in the fall, or whatever it may be. And keeping in mind that right now, in this moment, that's a true statement. I'm having scary thoughts about those things. It's also true that that's all that's happening right now in that moment, because there is uncertainty about those things. And there's science that tells us that people who are vulnerable for anxiety will respond to uncertainty in the way other people respond to threats. And so keeping in mind that uncertainty does not imply a negative outcome, that optimism is actually a skill too, like a muscle that can be worked out and improved upon. Someone is not optimistic in their character. They are using skills in order to be able to not believe the scary thoughts in the absence of evidence that they're true.
Excellent. That's incredibly helpful. I like feelings are not facts, thoughts are not evidence. Well, I wanted to open it up to questions for people in the audience. I have one here, right here, and then I'm going to start taking these off of the chat as well. But there is a question about my child is becoming afraid to leave the house, and I worry that when we're allowed to leave and resume activities, she will have this fear. She become agoraphobic. How can I convince her it's okay to go outside now if we take reasonable precautions? We try occasional walks or rides, but she feels sick and wants to come home.
So I think that I'm worried about the second wave. I see Dan asking a question there too that's very similar to that, is that many kids are getting really comfortable in the space that they're in right now. I specialize in school refusal, and my kids are living their best lives in their mind right now. They're like, I don't have to go to school. I get a few hours of work a day. I don't have to go outside and face my fears. So I'm worried about a few different kinds of disorders coming up. And agoraphobia is the top of my list because right now we are pairing in our brains home with safety and out of home as danger. And we know that, neurons that fire together wire together. And so the more we can get kids out riding bikes, doing things, whatever we can do to get them active outside of the home, to practice and rehearse the idea that we can follow guidelines effectively and maintain safety is a really, really important thing. And so I think that for those kids that you're really worried about in that way, there's a few things. So modeling for them all the things we're talking about so far, we can be anxious and, all of those things. But also, if you're really concerned about something like agoraphobia, seeking out professional support, I think, is really important for that. I'm really worried about the deluge of calls coming in August, as so many kids are going to say, I don't want to do this. We, dealing with school refusal kids, one of our primary goals is to keep the kids off of distance learning. Because once they get a taste of it, it's really hard to get them back into school because it's so much more comfortable for them, and it gives people the illusion of an education. It's at best a poor approximation to an education for most of these kids. And so I'm terrified of the levels of school refusal and avoidance that we're going to be seeing, because now they're really comfortable. At the same time, when they get back into school, they're now being taught that that's a dangerous place to be. So now there's more reasons to be in school. So I really expect an epidemic of things like agoraphobia, contamination-based fears, in some cases, panic disorder, generalized anxiety, worry about, well, what's the next thing that might happen? The world's predictable now in that way. So building these foundational skills in more of a preventative way, really teaching kids these skills before they know they need them, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the reason that when we're coaching kids, we're doing so much to emphasize the non-school activities, right? Someone's really great with their hands. How do we get them to go create a plan to build? You can learn executive function skills when you're building, your own toolbox, literally, physically with wood, as well as you can writing an English paper. And so it's really important to almost like they sneak the math skills in when you're doing the recipes and cooking. We're sneaking in those executive function skills. And I think those are things, it's really important to have them plan time in their day that's, to your point, not just school time, because at school time it's tough because there's a lot of time on the computers.
Right. And so one of the things also for parents to know, I mean, I could go on for hours about parent training for anxiety, but many parents think they have to prevent their kids from experiencing anxiety or distress in general. And they feel like they're failing as a parent if their kids are struggling. No, you have the front row seat to growth. Struggle is important. Every major culture and tradition in religions across the globe have struggle as something that's important and meaningful for us to go through. And so allowing kids to find their way by struggling and growing as a consequence of that experience is going to be really, really important. So I know we're getting ahead of ourselves with return to school, but for the parents who are listening or the educators who are involved with this, is really teaching the kids that it's okay to experience anxiety. It's actually expected and appropriate. We just don't want to use avoidance as the means of coping with it. There are much more healthy approaches. Avoidance is the lifeblood of an anxiety disorder, avoidance of places, of people, and of emotion. And so we want to teach them non-avoidant coping skills that they can use that are much more durable and sustainable, because one of the things that we say in our center all the time is that anxiety is two things. Anxiety is temporary and harmless, but avoidance can ruin lives. And so I run this anxiety treatment center, but I don't treat anxiety. I don't have to. What we really are is an avoidance treatment center. And if we can treat the avoidance effectively, the anxiety will die a natural death. So it's really important that parents know about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. There's other questions that are coming in. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and ask it in the chat. One of the comments I'll make on that is that, for resilience, for you to have people ask all the time, how do I build a resilient child? And one of the aspects of resilience is knowing that you have the tools that you can overcome situations, right? Know that you're worthy of love just the way that you are, and also know that you are absolutely capable of overcoming things on your own. And you can't do that unless you face those challenges. And when we look back in our lives, and we look at the things we're most proud of, most people, I'm sure they tell you and they tell us, they're most proud of the things that were the hardest for them, that had some kind of fear or anxiety associated with them. And so again, that whole concept of being able to name it and talk about it, right? You went outside and, wow, look at how well you did in covering your face with that mask, and, what the things that they did do to overcome, to your point, the strategies to help them.
Yeah, and by the way, the American Psychological Association has some great online resources for building resilience. So if you just Google Road to Resilience APA, you'll find some really great links. And there's some age-specific ones too for kids. The teen one is called Got Bounce, and it lists 10 things the teens can do to build resilience. So anyone watching, look them up. They're evidence-based. One of my colleagues and mentors, Mary Albert, was a central player in the development of those guidelines. Yep, there you go. Thank you, Lindsay. So, a really important skill set, just to read through those and make sure that you're helping the kids with that.
Yeah, great. It looks like, hi Diane, how are you? We have one question here. My teenage son who has anxiety and ADHD hasn't been outside for a month, very content playing video games with friends, but this is pretty unhealthy. Avoidance is definitely at play. It's harder to try to convince a teen to do something they don't want to do or is fearful about.
Yeah, I see that in my house too. Like I get that teens right now are trying to be comfortable. I think one of the questions that a lot of parents have is that teens are connecting with their friends through gaming right now as their primary way to connect with people. And so there's some healthy things happening in the middle of that. But I think everything in moderation. And so a lot of things would be, the rule in the house is you have to be out of the house every single day, whether it's taking the dog for a walk, just going for a walk yourself, anything that you like to do, walking in the woods. We know that being in nature reduces distress. It increases serotonin levels. There's some really great benefits of being out in nature wherever you can find it. So balancing the idea that you can connect with your friends online playing gaming, and again, that word, be outside part of the day and doing something that's physical, and making sure that you're modeling that wellness thing too, that you are out there exercising, taking the walks every day, doing the things that are important for you to be doing.
Mm-hmm. We have a blog, and then we'll take one last question before we wrap it up because I know we're a couple of minutes over, but we have a blog that's on the Study Pro website that talks about how to help kids feel that their favorite activities or preferred activities are the center of the show and still having other activities they know they do. So, okay, what are the times we know you're going to play video games? Let's put that central in your schedule. And to your point, now let's pick one thing they're going to do. What time is that going to be? And so, I think sometimes they fear that even though they're playing video games for so long, that somehow they're not going to have enough time to play video games, even though it's hours and hours. So the final question here is, what's some strategies to help students that might not feel safe at home at all right now? Parents are still working because they have to, unreliable internet, food accessibility challenges, parent conflict.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've been talking about it at my center. I did a webinar 2 nights ago for an immigrant organization, and some of those people are also having concerns about, I don't want to go get medical help because I'm undocumented, and what if they deport me or put me in a confined setting right now if I go to the doctor? These are real societal concerns, and I'm most worried for the kids who are in and for adults for that matter, who are in toxic, abusive homes right now and they can't get out. Food insecurity is another issue. There are many people that are feeling unsafe right now. I think that right now, in solidarity, we are all behind closed doors, and we don't want to have the misperception that what happens behind other people's closed doors is their business. And so, if there are kids that you're aware of, or if your friends know of if your kids have friends that they know are in an untenable situation, please reach out for help. This is a time to be aggressive in meeting kids' needs, because these kids are not going to be able to meet their own needs right now. They are literally locked in some cases, in very abusive households. So people that work in social work right now and so forth are really concerned about the role of the epidemic in terms of the quarantine and the limiting of their resources that these kids can access. For many kids, school is their place of safety.
Safe place.
Yeah, and that's taken away right now. So the idea of it takes a community, it takes a village, has never been more true than it is now, even though we're doing it in isolation. So, checking in on people, having your teenage, kids check in on their friends, and if there's concerns about those things, the really important things like hunger and abuse, it's incumbent, I believe, on all of us to take care of the most vulnerable that are there right now. But it's obviously a multifaceted, multi-layered, systemic issue that requires that coordinated, comprehensive response. And unfortunately, we know there's going to be a lot of kids who fall between the cracks of that from a societal level. So this is where the individuals can step in and do the very best that we can do to make sure that's not happening.
Thank you. All right. Well, if you liked the presentation now or the webinar now, we are doing this again at noon. We are, to some people's questions, definitely providing the replay. We'll provide all the links to everything that we just had talked about, and the APA and the blog. And sorry, I missed it. I just wanted to let everybody know that in 2 weeks, we are going to have another kind of an expert panel and talking more about how to really make distance learning work. We have 3 executive function coaches also in their day life. They're school psychologists and technology specialists and counselors. And so I know we as parents, myself included, yourself included, Dr. Dalton, have a lot of questions about how to make this work for our kids. And so that's what we're going to be doing in 2 weeks, 9 a.m. and noon again. So thank you everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Dalton. We'll see you again at noon. If you love this and you want to send people to the noon, the participants, feel free to do that. So we'll see you, Dr. Dalton, in a couple hours. And thank you again, everybody else.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.